This is Rugby Merlin and welcome back to the channel. So in this video we're going to discuss the rule changes and the proposed rule changes that World Rugby have introduced recently, and also talk about whether those are a direct response to the success that South Africa have had in the World Cup. First of all, we're going to talk about the rule changes themselves and then discuss whether they are a direct response to South African tactical dominance over the rest of the World Rugby. The rule changes are basically divided into a few different parts. You've got immediate law changes, possible law changes, possible trials, and then like further research. So those are things that may happen in the future. So all of them are pretty interesting. Let's get into the first category, which is immediate law changes. The Caterpillar Ruck, which has become so prominent in World Rugby recently, they're going to try and get rid of that. They're going to give a countdown to use the ball, and they're going to shout use it sooner, and then they start the countdown, I guess. So from my perspective, box kicking, I'm not a great fan of it. So if it gets rid of that, I know scrum halves have become very adept at box kicking in the last 10 years or so, but yeah, it's something I don't really enjoy in the game. So I'm all for that, to be honest with you. Second, hookers in the scrum, I thought they already had to do the breakfoot, but it's going to be more of a integral part of the scrum, and the breakfoot is going to be refereed more severely by the looks of it. So yeah, that's a safety issue, I guess, but as long as it's implemented well and doesn't result in more like free kicks and penalties, then I'll be a happy man. Water carriers, things kind of kicked off between Monsieur Reynard and Neil Jenkins, the kicking coach for Wales, who brought the water on in the Six Nations. And yeah, in fairness, Neil Jenkins was out of order, the Welshman. He was asking for penalties when he brought the water on, which I think was a bit of an overstep. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward, to be honest with you. On to the possible law changes. Now, the first one is the DuPont law, which I guess is named after DuPont because he exploited it so well. But yeah, it's a terrible law. Scotland and France, I think, was the most egregious example of it. It just totally broke down the game and slowed it down. And yeah, it basically means the players don't have to retreat after there's a kick put in front of them. So it was awful, to be honest with you, and the kicker didn't have to chase his own kick to put everyone onside. So for me, that should have been in the immediate law change, because it serves nobody and definitely a hindrance to the flow of the game. Second one is a shot clock for scrum and lineouts. I think this is going to be impossible really to implement, and it's going to be a disaster if they try to. Those are kind of integral parts of the game, and it gets on to the last point really in this one, which is scrum, free kick from a scrum. So sometimes you'll get a free kick from a scrum, and you can opt to have another scrum, you know, because if you kick to touch from a free kick, it's not your throwing. So strong scrummaging sides like South Africa will often opt for the scrum, you know, and using your pack dominance or your scrum dominance to your advantage. So this is where it starts to get a bit shady for me, because everything they're trying to do is trying to remove the set piece from the game, you know, and that's such an integral part of rugby. Anyone who's grown up playing or who knows rugby at all knows that line out and scrum, that's your bread and butter of the game. And the fact that those things exist in the modern world, even if you like, is what makes rugby such a unique sport. And in general, World Rugby, and I think some cheerleaders are trying to get rid of that aspect of the game. And if you want to change the game to league, well, league already exists, right? You know what I mean? They did that already like 100 years ago. So that game already exists. So if you want to go and watch that, go and watch that. If you want to watch Rugby Union, then line out and scrum is a part of it. Don't try and diminish their importance in the match. So that's enough of my preaching, but on to the last category. So the last category is further analysis, and this is where really it's obvious what World Rugby is trying to do, to be honest with you. You've got the 20-minute red card for unintended foul play. So that one, okay, it's worth looking at. So as long as you're doing further assessment or further analysis, then fine. I can see it, but again, it's tinkering with the tactics of the game in terms of substitutions, and this is where it really gets on high alert, particularly for South Africa, because with Rassie in charge, they haven't had the greatest relationship with World Rugby, which is crazy because World Rugby actually organizes the World Cup, and I think this is where a lot of it stems from. There's a discrepancy between how the two unions think, and it goes on to replacements. So they're even proposing going back to the old ways, which is you can't replace a player unless that player is injured. So diminishing the tactical influence of a bench. So this is what Rassie is so good at. He's good at tactics, right? So you have an 8-man bench. How can I use that best to my advantage? That is all sport is about, is using your advantages and maximizing them. And Rassie is a past master of that. Now, it seems like World Rugby is trying to punish him for it by reducing the tactical advantage of the bench, which he has used, to South Africa's advantage. In South Africa's case, and it could be the same in different arenas, but in South Africa's case, they have a very strong and dominant pack. They're big physical men, they're very strong. So let's use more of our advantage on our bench, to give us an advantage in the game. We take the risk, but we also get the reward. So that's part of the beauty of sport is, working out your tactics. What are you going to do for the game? How can we get an advantage? Rassie is great at that. World Rugby seems to be trying to level the playing field all over. So, and not even leveling the playing field, but taking advantage away from South Africa. So that's totally wrong, and 100% that's a response to South Africa's success. Other teams didn't like it because it put them under the cosh. It gave South Africa an advantage, and they thought that was unfair, So it's plain and simple. It's obvious, and South Africans are right to be upset about that. The last couple of rules, TMO, not getting involved in tackle height. So they're thinking about implementing the lower tackle height. I think that would be a mistake as well. As far as I'm concerned, the TMO it should be only speak when spoken to, and then the jackal, getting rid of the jackal to prevent player injury. It's a good point, but at this stage in rugby's development, it would be very hard to substitute that, and they'd have to have a good framework in order to manage rucks without the jackal threat. So you can't just get rid of it, but that would take a lot of assessment. But overall, I think there's a definite discrepancy between the rugby unions of each nation, particularly South Africa's and World Rugby. World Rugby seems to still be in this ivory tower on high, just mandating and dictating rules to everybody else, and they have to follow it. And if you don't follow it, tough luck. And that's not the way to conduct a professional business and a sport like rugby. For the future of rugby, which they always talk about, and it's like we're thinking of the future of rugby and the safety of rugby. Yeah, okay, so involve everybody in the discussion then, you know what I mean? You can't have like nations calling for rule changes that are going to benefit their own nation, without it being called out, So, it's a little bit of a rant, I guess, in this video, but I thought it warranted it because, those rule changes, some of them were not the best. So anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for listening. I will see you next time. All right, bye-bye.